Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the clean of heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when they insult you and persecute you, and utter every kind of evil against you, falsely, because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward will be great in heaven. Gospel of the Lord.
Praise you, Lord.
Today is the feast of All Saints. Normally we don't have an opportunity to celebrate All Saints on a Sunday. Normally it's a holy day of obligation, but this year we have the opportunity to celebrate it on a Sunday. And it's a great celebration. I love the solemnity of All Saints. In the church calendar, we have different feast days of lots of different recognized saints. You all have different patron saints that you know of. And the solemnity of All Saints is primarily about the unofficial saints, those saints who are not officially recognized by the church, but are in heaven. So every year at All Saints, I think about all the people who I have anointed, given the last rites, the people who I have buried. I think about just recently my friend Father Roberts, or on Friday, Marianne Wills, who I pray to God is now a saint in heaven. I love this feast of All Saints, in which particular we celebrate our loved ones who have gone before us. And I love the reading from All Saints, from the book of Revelation. You guys are probably starting to understand. I really like the book of Revelation. One of the best books in the Bible. So great. And the reading we have today is very fitting. And I wonder if you noticed why. Why do we have this reading from the book of Revelation on the Feast of All Saints? What is taking place? As I mentioned to you before, oftentimes when we read the book of Revelation, we think of it as a vision of the future. And a good chunk of the book is not so much about the future, but rather about heaven. And St. John is in heaven in Revelation chapter 7, which we had today. And it says that he looked, and he had a vision of a great multitude, which no one could count, from every nation, race, people, and tongue. And they stood before the throne of God, and before the Lamb Jesus. And they all cried out in one voice, "Salvation comes from our God and from the Lamb." And they were holding palm branches, which symbolizes victory. They are those who are victorious in this life and therefore merited life with God for all eternity. It's beautiful. There's so many things we could say about this reading. In fact, with our high schoolers last Sunday, we spent nearly an hour just talking about this reading. It was great. Little plug, we're actually starting a Bible study for adults as well. If you're interested in doing that on Sunday evenings, you should check the bulletin. Going through these readings for Sunday Mass. It's a great opportunity. And I especially love the last line. These are the ones who have survived the time of great distress, and they have washed their robes, and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. I love that irony. Normally when you wash a robe, you don't wash it in blood. It wouldn't become white. And yet the blood of the Lamb, Jesus, makes us pure, makes us white. Again, shameless plug, you may have noticed the alb I'm wearing today. It kind of reminds me of this, right? Being washed in the blood of the Lamb and my robe being made white. I have these red crosses symbolizing the blood of the Lamb on my white alb. I was really excited to mention that last night, and then I was getting ready to put this on, and I realized I forgot to iron it, so I wasn't able to. So very excited this morning. Symbolic. An alb washed in the blood of the Lamb. This reading is so remarkable. It's powerful. It reminds us of the glory that we are all called to. Truly, every single one of us is called to partake of this glory in heaven. It's a reminder to us that we were not made for this world, but for the next, and for a glorious existence, symbolized in all these different ways in the reading. It also reminds us not just of the glory that we're called to as individuals, but it reminds us of the glorious communion we are called to as well. All of these people in the heaven, this great multitude, crying out in unison, in one voice, in perfect communion with one another. I think this is a message that we could use today, especially as we prepare for the election. So much division and resentment in our culture. So many political divides, but not just political divides, also Christian divides. Sadly, we as Christians, there are thousands of different denominations. We're not in communion. Even in our families, sometimes it's the people that are closest to us in which we experience a lack of communion, broken relationships. Even in this parish, sometimes we as Christians and as Catholics and as people, we can be so violent towards one another. Think about how many times a week you hear people making accusations against a fellow Christian, fellow Catholic, speaking judgment on their fellow man. And yet, all of us are called to communion. Think about that person who annoys you the most, who has offended you the most, who has harmed you, persecuted you, treated you unjustly. You are called to communion with that person for all eternity. I'm reminded of a great movie that came out in the 80s. I wonder if any of you have seen it. It's called The Scarlet and the Black. Anybody ever seen The Scarlet and the Black? It's a great movie. And it's about a man who is not an official saint, but who I believe is a saint in heaven today. It's about the time of World War II. And towards the end of World War II, in Rome, Italy was taken over by the Nazi Germans. And so they occupied Rome for roughly a year before the Axis powers were defeated. And so during the course of that year, the Nazis invaded Rome, and they started doing what Nazis do. They started persecuting Jews. And also many prisoners of war were fleeing to that area because the Vatican was technically neutral territory. And so people were seeking refuge in Rome and in the Vatican. And in the midst of this, there was a man named Monsignor O'Flaherty. And he started what was called the Rome Escape Line. And what the point of the Rome Escape Line was, is that he and a network of fellow Catholics, they found ways to hide and protect Jews, and hide and protect prisoners of war and soldiers who were fleeing from the Nazis. Because of Monsignor O'Flaherty, over 6,000 lives were saved in just that 1 year. He was notorious. The Nazis really didn't like him. In fact, his greatest enemy was the head of the secret police, a man named Herbert Kappler. They hated him because he was like the mysterious man. They would always see him in the Vatican, but then they would hear whispers of him going in all sorts of different disguises and costumes throughout the city, and they never caught him. This great movie portrays it. Herbert Kappler was the head of the secret police, and of course, he hated Monsignor more than anybody. And they had a great relationship of being enemies. And sure enough, at the end of the war, the Nazis lost, and so the Allied powers were coming. And Herbert Kappler, who had sent countless people to concentration camps, who had persecuted people and put people to death, he found himself in a desperate situation. What was going to happen to him and his family when the Allied powers came in? Many of the Nazi sympathizers were persecuted, even their family and their children. And so Herbert Kappler did the unthinkable. And he asked Monsignor O'Flaherty for mercy. He came to him in secret just days before the Allied forces came in, and he begged Monsignor to help his wife and children flee the city and seek refuge. And Monsignor O'Flaherty accepted. And through his network, was able to get Kapler's wife and children out of the city. And Kapler was arrested, sentenced to life in prison. And for the rest of his life, Monsignor visited General Kapler in prison every month for years. So much so that eventually General Kapler decided to be baptized and received into the Catholic Church. These men who were such vicious enemies became brothers. And I would like to believe that in heaven, it's not just Saint O'Flaherty, but also Saint Herbert Kapler, living in perfect communion now in heaven. This feast is so beautiful. Reminds us of the glory that we are called to. Reminds us of the great cloud of witnesses and intercessors we now have on our behalf. And indeed, it encourages us to seek communion with one another because we are called to it in the next.